You've probably heard things about Japan's internet, right? Well, today we're going to dig into a really fascinating theory that flips that whole conversation on its head. It suggests what we're all seeing isn't some unique cultural issue, but actually more of a statistical illusion.
So let's get right to it. The big question is this: why does it feel like there's so much hateful and extreme speech visible on the Japanese internet? I mean, it's something a lot of people have noticed, and this analysis offers a pretty surprising answer. Okay, so you have one question, but really two very different answers. The easy answer, the one a lot of people jump to, is that it's a cultural problem, something unique to Japan. But the theory we're breaking down today, it says, nope, not at all. It argues this isn't a Japanese problem, but a human problem, one that we just happen to see more clearly in Japan for some very specific reasons. All right, so let's start by challenging that common narrative. The observation itself isn't really up for debate. Yeah, extreme rhetoric is pretty visible online. But the why, that's where this new theory takes a really sharp and interesting turn.
You see, when something's that visible, it's easy to conclude it must be a deep-seated issue, a problem with the national character, right? But what if that's a total misreading of the situation? What if the very evidence we're looking at is pointing to something else entirely?
So here's the pivot. Instead of looking at culture, this theory asks us to look at math, a universal constant. We're basically shifting our whole perspective from sociology to statistics. And believe me, it changes everything. And the core of this whole thing is an idea you probably know, the bell curve, or what's called a standard distribution. Just think about it. In any huge group of people, for almost any trait you can measure, most folks are going to be somewhere in the middle, but you will always have a few people way out on the extreme ends. Well, this theory says that applies to toxic behavior too. It's predictable. And this is the kicker. It applies everywhere. In any country, doesn't matter where. About 95% of people are in the moderate middle. But on either side, you have this little statistical fringe, about 2.5%, with some pretty extreme views. This isn't a cultural thing. According to this theory, it's basically a mathematical law of human society.
This quote from the source really nails it. This fringe isn't a Japanese phenomenon. It's the negative long tail of the human species. So the real question isn't if this fringe exists. It exists in every country. The real question is, why do we see it so clearly in Japan? So, if this fringe is literally everywhere, why does it seem so much louder in Japan? Well, the theory says it all comes down to one simple concept: the social cost of speaking out. Let's break that down. In a high-cost environment, like the global English-speaking internet, saying something truly extreme carries huge risks. You could lose your job, face public backlash, there's intense scrutiny. So, that fringe learns to keep quiet. But in Japan, the Japanese language itself acts like a natural barrier. It shields conversations from that same level of global pressure. So the social cost of expressing those extreme views, it's just lower. And this is absolutely crucial. This difference in social cost doesn't mean there's more toxicity in Japan. It just means more of it is visible. This creates this powerful illusion, which the source calls a visualization bias. We're biased by what we can see. The source uses this fantastic metaphor. Think of online toxicity like garbage. The question isn't which country produces more garbage. The question is, how do they manage it? Some societies put a really heavy locked lid on their garbage cans, and, well, others don't. And this is exactly how that false picture gets painted. You're comparing what's right out in the open in one place with what is very deliberately hidden in another. Japanese speakers can see their own online garbage pretty directly, but the garbage from other languages, it's either locked away in private channels and forums, or it's just inaccessible because of the language barrier. And so you end up with this totally wrong assumption that the problem is only in Japan, when really, it's everywhere. But you know, this ability is only one part of the equation. There's another huge factor that can make that tiny little fringe sound like a massive crowd, and that's external amplification. This is where things get a little manipulative. See, the theory suggests that these big disinformation campaigns, they don't create anger out of thin air. Honestly, that's way too hard. What they do is much smarter. They find what's already there, the little embers of that disgruntled statistical fringe that exists in every single society. And then they just pour gasoline on it. And there's a pretty clear playbook for how this works. Step 1, you identify that disgruntled fringe.
Step 2, you use everything you've got, bots, algorithms, targeted ads to amplify their messages and make them trend. And step 3, the goal of all this is to create this powerful, distorted illusion that this tiny group is actually the majority, which is perfect for sowing chaos and division.
Okay, so let's put all these pieces back together now. We've got the universal fringe, we've got the social cost of speech, and we've got this idea of external amplification. Let's see how they connect to form this new explanation. Here's the logic step by step. 1. Every single country has this small toxic fringe. It's a statistical fact. 2. In most places, huge social costs and external pressure keep that fringe hidden. 3. In Japan, the language barrier just lowers that pressure and reduces the cost of speaking out. And 4, the result isn't more toxicity, it's just more visible toxicity. A universal problem becomes unusually exposed.
And this final quote just perfectly sums up the entire idea. It completely reframes the problem away from culture and focuses it on structure. What we're seeing isn't some kind of moral failure. It's a universal human trait that's been exposed because the walls that normally hide it just aren't as high. And that leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to end on, doesn't it? If this model is right, this isn't just about Japan. It really forces us to turn the mirror back on ourselves and ask, what toxic fringe exists in our own society, perfectly hidden by our own language, our own social pressures? What garbage is piling up right behind a wall we can't even see over?